Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Practice is underway for Coach Jim Harbaugh and his team. We are just 3 weeks away from teeing it up in South Bend, and there is much work to do. Today we bring you the first of our 3 preview shows. In just a minute, we'll be joined by beat writer Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press. First, a few news and notes to get us rolling. Coach B is recovering from a scheduled double bypass heart surgery done Monday at the University of Michigan Hospital. He said he feels well, should be home in a couple of days, and will be at full speed when practice begins in October. Assistant coach Sadie Washington will take over Coach B's duties when the team makes their Spain trip later this month. Our thoughts and prayers are with Coach B for a quick recovery and a return to the sidelines. We all get excited when fall practice starts, even though news of what's happening behind the scenes is very hard to come by. We'll hear injury updates, and the media will have some access to the staff and even some of the players. So Jim is not taking the team on a submarine trip as he did in his first year. We all have lots of questions, but we'll have to wait until Labor Day weekend before we start getting answers. Even the beat writers have no idea what to expect until they see this team play. Joining me next on our Game Day segment is beat writer Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press. You're on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Back with us on our Game Day segment as we do the first of 3 preview shows on the upcoming season is beat writer Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press. Long time, Nick. Great to have you back.
Summer gets faster every year, Mike, doesn't it?
It certainly does get faster. I don't know if these next 3 weeks will go by quickly. The anticipation, as we know, is building for that opener in South Bend. The team reported for practice on Friday, Nick. We've been hearing talk Jim might take the team back in the submarine this year. Is that official, or have you heard anything like that?
No, I mean, any more than he already has. I mean, it's not. He's not doing what they did, unless he changes his mind this week. He's not doing what they did that first year where they didn't talk to anybody for like 2 weeks or whatever it was. I don't think that's happening. But, Michigan doesn't let anybody see practice, and, they stay in the dorm. So it's as closed off as most places get. So in that sense, I think it's probably pretty close to the same.
Competition at quarterback, Nick. Is this Shea Patterson's job to lose?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And I think that there's not many people who are around it expected anything different, and a lot of it, frankly, I think was, how fast or how slow this thing was gonna work itself out really kind of depended on him. How quickly he goes out there and really again puts the hammer down and makes it very, very clear to whoever that he's the best quarterback on the team. I know folks were excited with or happy with whatever you want to call it, the way that Brandon Peters performed in the offseason. But at the same time, Brandon didn't have the job last year for a number of reasons, hammered down because he didn't go out and make it perfectly clear. And some of that you could say maybe the coaches should have seen through some of that and taken it, whatever. But the point remains, a lot of this will be on the quarterback to go out there, leave no doubt, and earn the job. And Shea Patterson's got to do that. To me, they have to do this faster than they've done it because he's going to need more time to develop with the offense. To think that 15 practices in the spring caught him all the way up to where he needs to be, that's nonsense. That's an exception or expectation that's not fair to anybody, and it's not one I don't think even Shea Patterson himself has. So if it's him, they don't have to tell us, they don't have to tell the world. But I mean, I got to think within 10 days of practice, you have got to know who it's going to be, and that person's going to have the benefit of working with first team reps for a good 2 weeks if you really want to give this thing a shot. Because you remember last year. Mm-hmm. They went into the last week and really into the game with no answer, and that can't happen again. You're doing a disservice to your own offense and your quarterbacks, and we saw for the first month and a half where that's why. And those guys it's college football, it's not the NFL. Those guys need more time, and I think that if you do it quicker, it benefits everybody.
Well, fans, of course, are going to focus on the quarterback battle, but for many of us, it's the offensive line that is the most important aspect of this or any good offense. Size up the offensive line situation as it is right now, Nick.
Yeah, I think the interior's fine. I think for the most part, at least it's you know what you have. And they were very excited about Cesar Ruiz when he got here, and I think the plan is still right along the time frame as they wanted. It was the second year he was going to be here. He was going to be a center, and then be the guy for them, inside, kind of captaining the line, and that'll be that. So he'll be in there, starting in the middle, and then he'll be flanked by Ben Bredesen and either Benwenu or Steven Spinellis. Really, I think they're confident in all four of those guys. All four of those guys have played, and all four of those guys have shown growth to a point where they can play. The tackle spots, they're begging people. That's the best I can put it. They're begging multiple people to step up and take jobs, and it just didn't happen in spring. They were excited with how, John Runyon looked in spring, but then again, they were excited with how John Runyon looked in spring last year, and that didn't carry over in the camp as he got dinged up, and that really hurt him, and then he dropped off. With Juwan Bushell-Beatty, I think it's been this song and dance now for a couple of years where there's days where he looks really good and there's days where he doesn't, and there's no consistency there. So those are the guys I think that at the end of spring, maybe simply because they were older, were the guys that were ahead of the line. But I would think that most others are going to get a chance here. James Hudson, of course, was the guy that when they switched him over last year, physically, James Hudson has everything that a left tackle needs. He's long, he's big, and he's fast. He's athletic, he bends well, so he's got all those tools. It's just a matter of when is it going to click for him. It's only his second year, and he was mainly, for whatever reason, a defensive player in high school. So he'll have to, ramp up his learning curve. And then, you go even further down the list and his younger guys. Jalen Mayfield is a true freshman who I'm sure will get a look. I don't know if Ryan Hayes is big enough yet to get a look. Then you look at your Stubers, your Filiaga, Joel Horningford. These are second-year players that if they're going to want to get in there and do something, this is a chance. But I mean, it's really it just came across to me for the last however many months that they were begging people. Some of these guys, they know what they have in those four interior guys. The tackles, they're just standing there like, is there anybody here that wants a job? Because no one's come out and take it. But it'll be interesting. I think that could certainly be something where that spills over into the regular season if no one really takes it. But the older guys were leading the way going in. That's not always how it plays out, though. So we'll see what happens with the youngsters if somebody can step up and get in there. But just mysteries. They're going to be mysteries until the season starts. We just aren't going to know. We're not going to know. It doesn't matter really to me who gets the job, but we're not going to know how they perform, until they get on the field. It's not necessarily to me the point isn't what name it is. It's how are they going to play, because we haven't seen anyone from any of that pool, come out and play consistent football, and that'll be the biggest question.
Well, Nick, last week when I knew we were going to have you on the show, I asked our listeners to shoot me some questions if they had any for you. So I've chosen a few, and the first two concern the offense. Karan Higdon, Chris Evans are thought to be the 1-2 punch in the backfield. One of my listeners, Shar, wants to know, will they be splitting carries, or is Karan right now the clear number one?
They'll split time the way that they kind of have in recent years, or every year that Harbaugh's been here. But no, it did seem like Higdon was the number one. And when I say they split carries, a lot of times what it's been over the years, if you can divide up 30 carries, a certain way, it would be, maybe 15 or 16 for someone, and then like 9 or 10 for someone, and then the last handful to a third back. So depending on a situation, depending on a game, I would think, based on everything that happened toward the end of last year, everything through spring, and going forward here, that Karan would be your number one, and then Evans would be your number two, though the distance between those two is really not that wide, and they'll both get, I could see a situation where both of them are getting double-digit touches, during a game, and then especially because your third back is just it's a mystery, again, of who that's going to be. So both will play, but I think Higdon's probably slightly ahead.
Well, Char followed that up with a question I think a lot of fans have been concerned about, Nick. Will the play calling be less convoluted this year? Is there going to be an offensive coordinator?
I don't think so. Pep Hamilton, I guess, if they want to, is the de facto. He's the assistant head coach. So in terms of titles, Harbaugh was asked about that a couple weeks ago, and that was the only name he brought up, and he kind of brought that up with a sigh. Is like, I don't really want to name a coordinator because I want them all to be sort of on the even level and sort of all working toward a common goal. I think the problem they had last year was that they basically had two guys who thought they were the offensive coordinator, and no one told either that they weren't. And that happened, I think, in 2016 a bit as well, and it certainly happened last year. But the bigger point here again is that the whole offense is still Harbaugh's. It still runs through him. He's still involved. There's not going to be a time unless I'd be shocked. I mean, I would be shocked if at some point in the near future Jim Harbaugh says, I'm no longer going to have a say in what plays are called for my football team on Saturdays. So even if he does have an offensive coordinator, that's what I've always told people, even if he did have one, he would still be overriding that person constantly. So that's just how it's always been done with him. And frankly, it's worked out more than it hasn't. So last year, I didn't think that the play calling on Saturdays was the issue as much as I thought that the problem they had started early in camp, where they probably allowed themselves to get. I think they tried to take pieces of everybody and put them into some sort of soup, and the offense was just a mess. It was just this. It was unbalanced. It didn't have a home base. It was just no identity. And frankly, I think if they get an identity and they can work from a handful of things where they know they do well, have those as a home base, and then work out from there, I think they'll be fine. I think that you can do a lot of things on Saturdays that'll help you, but if you don't have a identity and not having a quarterback doesn't help that either, of course. But I think that's really the bigger thing to me. It's a lot more of the behind the scenes work that I think that we'll never see, that needs to get repaired, because that's what it screamed to me. It was that they went into games with just such a wide array of things they wanted to do rather than a much more narrow focused things. The Ohio State game at the end of the year was the example of growth there, where they actually had a very, very good plan, but it looked like it was scripted so far, and it took so much time and energy and effort to get that thing done, and as opposed to the early parts of this year where the plan was all over the place. So, they've got it in them. I think they can do it. But again, that's one thing we're going to have to see if it's different.
Well, Matt from Westerville, Ohio, has a question about the wideouts. Matt says that Tariq Black, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Grant Perry appear to be the trio we'll see the most of to start the season. Who else do you expect we could see in that mix, Nick?
We'll see Nico Collins a lot, I think. They were excited about his growth from first-year player to getting some weight on him and getting a little stronger. And then I think they're all excited to see if Oliver Martin can make a run there and get on the field. As a guy who didn't play much last year due to injury and it was a little overwhelming for him early, and so he's had a year and a half to settle in. And I know they really like the spring that both those guys had, Collins and Martin. So, but this is always the thing I caution people. We hear this. I mean, it's like I've told people for years, we could make a 22-man roster of the all-time great spring practice players that never did a thing,
Mm-hmm.
And we hear it all the time, right? And I mean, Mike, I talk to you every summer, and we go through the list, and I bet we'd go back and just say, well, yeah, that guy, they really like him. I think he had a great offseason, he had a great camp, and then the lights come on, and it's deer in the headlights. So a lot of these guys are still young, and we even with Donovan, I think that I still really want to see how much growth he's had. They've said all these great things, but Donovan had a lot of growth to do last season, and while he got some of that done, I think that there's still a lot more to go because he could be really, really good. Tariq Black coming back, I think he will be really, really good, of course. So we'll see. I mean, I think that, and again, like I said before, the faster you get that quarterback settled, the faster those guys all can start developing with him in timing and everything else, and everything will be better, quicker when the season starts.
Well, here's a question on a lot of fans' minds, something that we've heard the entire offseason. This is from listener Thunder Yang, who wants to know, will Jim Harbaugh be on the hot seat if he loses this year to both Michigan and Ohio State again?
No, I don't think in any rational person's mind. I mean, the only way that there would be a situation I would think that he would be in danger of what's going on here is if they were like 2-10 or something, or they were they didn't make a bowl. They were so bad that they were sub 500 or whatever. I think that's if that happened, you start losing to people that you're not supposed to lose to. I think that you'd see that start to creep up. But people are going to be mad. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. I mean, I think he's more safe than most have been because they spent so much time and money and they've invested so much into him. And most still think it's the right decision. No one really thinks he's a bad football coach. It's just the job was really hard when you got here because you had Ohio State. Now, I guess we'll see what happens with Urban Meyer. I guess there's number one there. But if Urban Meyer stays, Ohio State is still, in theory, one of the top 2 programs in America, so you've got to catch them. And then Michigan State has been, they're going through currently, with the 1 year as an exception in 2016, they're going through the best stretch of football they've ever had. So catching up to those teams, the only consequence would be is you're just that much further away from being what you think you can be. And I'm not sure if there's anybody else out there that gets you any closer to that. So, no, I think people will be upset, and sure, I mean, that's fair enough, but no, I don't think it'd be something where they'd be like, you're fired. I mean, if you don't do this, or we're going to look elsewhere because, I don't know, I mean, we all saw the 7-8 years that everybody around here pined for Jim Harbaugh every day, and I don't think a lot of that's changed. I think most people are still very much in the same, he's the right person for this. And the bigger fear, I think, and this is why a lot of this gets created maybe internally with fans is, if it's not him, then who? Because that maybe is the answer. I mean, if he can't pull it off, then, maybe it's just not meant to be in terms of maybe you're not going to be Alabama or what Ohio State has been. Maybe you're going to have to settle for being pretty good in some of those years, and then maybe you're going to go through your lumps. That's just part of how football works everywhere else. So I don't know how it's going to go, but I think it could be a pretty easy fix here for them to get back in the right track. But you're right, they got to get one of those games, it seems like, because if you go 0-2 again, then people were furious last year, and all they wanted to talk about were those 2. Forget the other 10, right? And that's especially the Michigan State. I guess that's probably the number one thing. If they can get that, I think that would release a lot of pressure there.
With us on our Game Day segment this week, as we begin our first of 3 previews, heading up to the season, is beat writer Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press. Nick, it's hard to imagine the offense not being better this year, even hopefully just more efficient, because Don Brown's defense is going to have this team in every darn game, aren't they?
Yeah. I think that's the thing to remember, and I've said this all offseason. The offense's job here, as basic as it sounds, is to just not screw it up and to just get out of the way. And because the defense is, like you said, this should be the bigger shock to me would be if this defense isn't terrific. I mean, that's really the thing. This should be the best in the Big Ten and one of the best in the country, based on what they have back. They bring literally everything except Mo Hurst, who is a big loss, and Mike McCray. But they bring 9 guys back, and then a bunch of guys who played behind that. So, there's depth everywhere. There's talent everywhere. They can withstand injury, which often happens, of course. But there's really no excuse for them not to be very, very good. But, they can only do so much for you, as we saw last year, where the offense, if it's turning the ball over, if it's, giving up bad field position, getting stuck between, down under a goal line and can't get out. I mean, that's just, the best example to me of the first 10 games or whatever it was of 2016, when the offense wasn't lighting up anybody necessarily. They weren't, putting up 50 a game or doing whatever, but they were just managing the game. If the drives didn't work, they punted well. They covered their punts well. They got good field position. The defense helped them out. They got the ball back. And eventually, over time, they would crack through, and they worked with a lot of short fields. They were good in the red zone. They took advantage of things. Drives ended with kicks, and they were efficient. They were efficient in that they were getting the most or getting something out of every opportunity they had, rather than just turning it over or, shooting yourself in the foot. So I think that's the big thing right now is get out of the way and let the defense do its job, because defense should be smothering and it should be outstanding. And I don't think there's anybody who really disagrees with that assessment.
No, but if there is an area of concern, would it be the safety play?
Yeah, I think so. And then, I guess you still got to wait and see what you get from the interior guys, how much of a drop-off that is, from Mo Hurst, of course, because it's not going to be the same. I mean, those guys, Solomon and Dwumfor and them, they could be good, of course, but they're not going to be Mo Hurst. So we'll see how much that is. But, yeah, the safeties, and really the bigger question, I guess, would be what do they do personnel-wise when someone spreads them out like that, because – to me, the answer very well could be is you take one or two of them off the field and you put extra corners out there. I mean, that very well could be what they end up doing. I look back to where they were the one year where they had Jeremy Clark with Stribling and Lewis, and before Clark got hurt, all three were playing all the time. I could see a situation where if teams want to spread them out, they like Ambry Thomas the way he's played, where they take Metellus or somebody off the field and they put Thomas out there and let him cover in the slot. Because if somebody's going to spread you out and just throw the way they were doing last year, as we saw, with some of the fade stuff and some of the one-on-one stuff in the slot, it's better maybe to have a corner in there covering. So it gives you more options, because I think the safeties will get a chance. You'll get your chance if you're Metellus. I mean, it's like, hey, you got to cover better. If you can't, you're on the field. And I think that'll be the ultimate answer, because I do think they have the luxury, like we said, they have the luxury of moving guys around and moving more people in there. There's Casey Hughes from Utah, or Cody Hughes, Casey Hughes, whatever his name is. I can't remember his first name. Starts with a C. We'll get there. But yeah, he's a nickel guy who can play a little bit of both. So they have more options. They're a little more flexible now. So it'll be up to the safeties to grow, but if they can, I think they have other options to cover up and fix themselves there.
Special teams, always critical, often overlooked. You don't even read much about it in the preseason magazines, Nick, and really until it bites you in the butt during the season, fans usually don't take notice. But field goal kickers, punters, kick returns, coverage teams, all so key. Your take on that aspect of this team, Nick?
Yeah, Nordine is this guy could be an All-American if he's consistent, and I think he knows that, and that's the bigger, he talked about a lot about this spring when we talked to him briefly there about how the whole thing was about, I'm sure this camp will be the same way, was about how he reacts after he misses something. That was his biggest focus point. So if he misses a kick, you cannot miss the next one, because that was his problem last year, where he'd miss one and that would lead to two more in a row. I mean, it's get off of it, move on, and make sure you make the next one. And he did a good job with that, he said, in the spring, and that was his main focus throughout the whole offseason, and it will continue to be that if you make a mistake, even if it's make a mistake in how you deliver it and the ball still goes through, make sure the next one's perfect. So I think that consistency, that comes with age and experience. We know he has the physical gifts to be outstanding. It's just a matter of being consistent, and that, of course, mental is a big part of that. So we'll see if he gets that piece solved. And then the punting situation, I don't know. Brad Robbins was all over the place as a freshman, but he was a freshman, so it's hard to really judge. They know he's got a great leg, but again, consistency. Will Hart, same thing. I mean, all those guys that were in there last year got a crack at it in practice, or otherwise I think it was the same result. So we knew it would be really hard for them to replace Kenny Allen when they did, and everyone remembers Blake O'Neill for that one fumbled snap, but he was outstanding for every other punt he made that year. So they got spoiled for 2 years having two really good punters, and they haven't gotten back to that level yet. And we'll see, because because if you can have a guy who is punting the way that those two were with a defense like this, my God, I mean, it's like it is suffocating to play against, because you're constantly getting pinned to go 90 yards against a group like this, and it just helps everything out. They were number one in field position, I think, those 2 years. So. Yeah, a lot of work to do and improvement to be done, but if they can get somebody to be kind of a weapon there, that could be a huge, huge factor that, like you said, Mike, nobody ever talks about, but until you see it on the field and you're like, whoa, yeah, this is helping out quite a bit.
As far as punt returns, kick returns, Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think a lot of people were frustrated with him at times last year. He early in the season, he looked like Stevie Preston, like I'm going to catch it. It doesn't matter. I'm going to take it. I'm going to go. But he got much more cautious as the season progressed. But then, at the end of the year, when you looked at his stats, they were pretty darn good.
Yeah, he had a couple long ones, and that helps out. I mean, that's really how a punt returner makes his money. If you can pop a couple long ones, that's going to help the average at the end. But Donovan, I say this all the time, and it's not a knock on anybody or any one thing. It's college football. It's freshmen coming from high school. Donovan had to learn how to play football last year, I think, at a high level. I mean, he was not fundamentally sound. He is an outstanding athlete. He's very, very smart, and he can do all these things that everybody sees on paper or in shorts. But when it comes time to go play in a live situation at a Big Ten level, he looked overwhelmed early on, and that's fine. That's totally normal. And the reason why he was on the field was because he's super smart and he's very athletic and he can absorb information quickly and he can make plays happen even when they break down. So I think that's why I'm so interested to see how everything works with him, because and the best way I can describe it, I guess, is I remember watching when they moved Zach Gentry to tight end, and he didn't know what he was doing, but you could see him and the way he was running around and the way everything looked for him. You're like, man, if that really does click at some point, he's going to get super confident and it's really going to take off. And now we see Zach Gentry is a 6'7", 260-pound guy who looks like a draft pick, and that's what's happened for him. It's taken 3.5 years or 3 years for that to happen, but it did. And Donovan, I think that if the same process could happen, maybe faster, if the confidence comes and he can click with the fundamentals of how to do this, how to play wide receiver and to return kicks, he could be an All-American. I mean, he's that athletic. So, but that's the next part. Tariq Black was ahead of him because he had better understanding of fundamentals and how to get open and how to run routes and all of this. Donovan is still probably a better athlete, and so it'll be up to him to get the other piece together and put it all in the field.
Well, Nick, part of me is in the crowd that says the time for excuses are over. It's been 3 years. This is the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
It's just time to win. But then there's the realistic part of me that looks at the schedule and says Michigan has to be better than good to win the Big Ten East and get to the championship game. And I want it to happen, but I just have a hard time imagining it, especially with those road games.
Yeah, it's just, we go back to it and people get mad every time I bring it up, but it's this ridiculous stat. This program hasn't won a road game of note for the last 3 coaching staffs. Yeah. I mean, it's just still there, and including Jim Harbaugh. So, I mean, it's just you got to prove it on the road first. And I've said a lot. I think they can get Notre Dame, but I think that would be a big boost to these guys, right? If you could start the season with a road win against a top-level team, that could give you some confidence. So I think that would be important. But, all year long I've said this could be a very, very good team, much improved team, one of the best teams in America, and they could be 9-3. I mean, that's just kind of the cold reality of it for them because of the schedule. But, if they can get back to playing the way they were at the end of 2015, at the start of 2016, they can beat anybody they want. And that's also a reality. If the defense is doing its job and the offense is playing efficient football, they're going to be very difficult to play against. And that's what I remember most about the early portion of Harbaugh's tenure here, is that Michigan went from a soft, sloppy, unorganized football team to a disciplined, tough, uncomfortable team to play against. Teams did not like playing against them because it was a physical grind, and they didn't make many mistakes. And they won a lot of games. They were like 20-5 or 20-4 or something like that to start out. So they can get back to that level, they can compete with anybody. But yeah, I mean, the whole excuses being over stuff, to me, and I've always looked at it like this. Jim Harbaugh has never made any, and he got here from day one and said the goal is to win right away. And if they don't, they failed. And that's how he continues to look at it, I think. And, he knows that this rivalry stuff is grinding people into the dust. And he knows that a lot of it has to do with him, but most of it has to do with people before him. I mean, the real reality here is that people are so frustrated because this stuff has been, they haven't had a Big Ten title in 15 years or whatever it's been, or 12 years. Yeah, Harbaugh's only been here for 3 of it, but at the same time, he's paid a lot of money to do it. So, we'll see. It's been very interesting. I look at it from, the standpoint of people inside the building. They of course have high expectations for Harbaugh, but they also know, that he's a very good football coach, and they know that it's a really hard job to hire a football coach. So there's that. And then look at fans, and sometimes fans can be rational or not. But yeah, I mean, we're going to see. I think you'll be able to see if this team's improved or not. I mean, you'll be able to tell if they're making moves or if it's more of the same. And that's the great thing about these games is there's no hiding once it starts. Message board, gossip, rumors, little spin or whatever they want to put it. You got to go play, and we'll see. And that's why it's a cool sport.
A lot of our fan base, especially the younger fans, when I talk to them, they want to return to the glory days, to the Bo days, back in the. And I tell them, hey, this is not your daddy's Big Ten conference. It's not the Big Two, Little Eight anymore. In reality, for those of us who are older, in the 60s and 70s, so for the better part of the last 40 years, the Big Ten was considered a weak overall conference. You're big, you're slow. Right. We heard that starting in the late 60s when we couldn't win Rose Bowl games and couldn't beat SEC teams. I don't think anymore, Nick. Have you ever seen a more loaded up and competitive Big Ten, not only the East, but from top to bottom? You can't take a day off anymore.
No, and it's been trending that way, like you say, for the last couple of years. And, you look around, the level of coaches in the league is really what always strikes me. I mean, you've got elite football coaches in the Big Ten, all across. I mean, even a guy like Jeff Brom at Purdue. I mean,
Right.
it's like he's a young guy, of course, but he's a very, very good football coach, and that was a terrific hire for Purdue, and he's going to get them better, and they're going to be tough to play. And there aren't any days off, like you said. I mean, everybody's schedule on some level is difficult to a degree, but it's more than that too. I mean, like I think it's the country. It's everybody spends money on football now. Everybody has the ability, if they want it, to go out and be competitive. It's just more difficult than it's ever been. But the thing I think that drives Michigan fans completely nuts is you tell them that it's borderline impossible to run a league like this, and then they say, "Well, Ohio State does it." You're like, "Well, yeah, you got a point there." It's just like, so. I think that's the thing that grinds people up is. But I always, that's maybe another podcast for another day, and the fact that Ohio State has built-in advantages that Michigan will never have. But, you can always be competitive to be in the fight, at the top of that league, and then a ball bounces one way or the other, and you see what happens. And I think that, that's really, to me, that's the expectation that people should have. Because that's fair. To be in the mix, and every once in a while you got to do it, of course, but to be like, you're going in November every year, and it's like, well, let's see who's going to do this, and we're in the conversation. And that's really the best you can kind of hope for if you're anybody, especially in a league like this, in a division like this, where you've got, 3 teams that you're playing every year that are in the top 15. And then if you got to draw Wisconsin on the other side, they're also up there too. So that's, all you can kind of ask for. If you're in that situation, that means you've taken care of your business and you've gotten some good wins. And you see what happens. I mean, like they were in 2016. It didn't work out the way they wanted it to at the end, but they were very much in the conversation for everything they wanted in the middle of November. And I think that's all you can hope for at this point, is to try to be in there and you see what happens, see if you can get a bounce or two. You got to pull it off, but I think it helps. The great press release, I guess, is when you finally do win one. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Well, Nick, you brought up our buddies down there in Columbus, and we don't usually talk about Ohio State in our August previews, but as we all know, it's a mess in Columbus right now, one of their own making, I might add. Do you think the powers that be down there are going to be able to bring the resolution to this situation? And now they're saying last night in the next 14 days?
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, I don't think they would have put that in paper if they weren't serious about doing it. I got to think it would be sooner than later. I don't know what I don't know. At first, when the investigation started, I thought this is simply a situation of we're going to stand here and see how the wind blows. We're going to see if people freak out about it, or we're going to see if people die down about it. And then, Urban Meyer and Zach Smith had what seemed to be a pretty coordinated, let's blame Ohio State for all this stuff on Friday, and that changed everything. And I don't think Ohio State was on board with any of that, but that changed everything. So maybe the timeline gets stretched now, because maybe now I assume they've got to look more as much into Gene Smith and the administration as they do Urban Meyer now. So yeah, I think probably within 2 weeks. And again, I've said this the whole time. I mean, not to be that guy, but I watched Jim Tressel get carried off the field in 2012 by players, and the stadium erupt like a year and a half after he admitted he was a noted cheater and liar. And if Urban Meyer's getting fired for lying to the media, then it's not happening at Ohio State. I don't think that's going to happen. He's not going to resign. It's going to be a matter of, whether or not the trustees are comfortable with having a coach who A, lied, or B, ignored what seems to, you can say whatever you want, whether he knew or did it, whatever. I mean, the fact was the guy remained on the staff for all those years. I mean, Mike, you and I can sit here and say, morally, he should have been fired the minute that came out.
Right.
Ethically, he should have been fired the minute it came out. We all agree on that. Whether or not it'll happen is the question that's much more difficult, and oftentimes brings about the side of college sports that we don't like, or sports in general, in that people often don't do the right thing morally. Legally, I'm not sure how much of a I'm not sure how much of a case Ohio State has to fire him with cause, and I think that's why you saw him do what he did with his statement, is that he put it kind of in their court. And I think someone will get fired out of this. I don't think it'll be Urban Meyer. If I had to bet, I think it would be Gene Smith. I think he'll fall on the sword, and Urban will be the coach. And how that looks in the state of Ohio, it'll look fine. Everywhere else, it'll look like we're talking right now. I mean, that's the reality of it. I mean, that's the sad truth of it, is that everywhere else we'll look at it and say, well, you got a liar, you got a coach who lied and tried to blame a reporter for all of it after he protected a guy, and then he used a guy that was the dirtbag to help him later. It'll look terrible. It'll look absolutely terrible. But that's a powerhouse program that hasn't had many trip-ups over the years, and that's part of the reason why. So they don't fire coaches unless a lot of things happen. A guy punches a player on the field, or you get caught lying 17 times, then you're fired. But if it's only one, I would think he survives, and that's my guess until proven otherwise.
Last question for you, Nick. Sunday, ESPN announced game day is going to be in South Bend for the opener. I guess that's where the first game day originated. And, for one, I'm thrilled to have Notre Dame back on the schedule. A lot of Michigan fans don't feel that way. But it's going to be a night game, a green out. I don't know if it's the first ever green out. That's what's going to take place.
That's new on me,
Yeah, that should look very strange at night on TV.
Yep.
They're going to be ranked higher than Michigan. I'm seeing them, 10, 11. Not that matters. There's not going to be much separating them. Notre Dame, if you care about the odds, Vegas has them favored by a bit right now. So, it's a huge game, absolutely. That's why game day's there. Michigan just flat out has to get this one. I really do think this is a must-win game.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to win it in the sake of the Big Ten race or anything. I don't think the world ends if you lose it. But you're right. I think I agree with you on some part of that. Like you've got to be. If you lose, it better be by like a score. You know what I mean? Like something where you're in it and you're right there, and it's like, okay, well, get a few things fixed, but this team's on the right path, and they can maybe correct this. But I mean that's why I keep going back to that. You got to get the quarterback fixed. You got to do all this. You got to do all that. Because this is a true road game against a team that should be good, that is considered on some level a rival still, right? I mean, I think most people would consider Notre Dame and Michigan a rivalry. It's a national stage. It's all this. It's a chance to go out and show, because recruiting has not been good. I mean, if we can be honest with ourselves here, they've lost ground with a lot of these top players because they haven't beaten anybody. It's a chance to go out on national TV and beat somebody of note in their building on the road. And so in that sense, when I look at it now, Mike, and I think about it after I talk myself into it, and maybe I agree with you because, this whole thing about you haven't beaten anybody on the road in 10 years or 12 years, whatever the hell it's been. I mean, that's got to stop. I mean, that's got to go away, and this is a great opportunity. It's 0-0 coming out of the gate. Everybody's even. You're coming out of camp. There's no judgments made on you before. You don't have any confidence problems. Everybody's ready to go. Sometimes those are the hardest games to prepare for. And sometimes they're the hardest to win because you just don't know what you're going to have. But it's a big one. It's a big one for this team here. It's a big one for off-season stuff and recruiting and everything else. And to show that you can perform on that stage. And I think that's always the knock on Michigan right now is that every time the stage and the lights get bright, they fold and whoever they're playing wins. And this will be an opportunity for them to show that they can do the opposite. And I think that sort of momentum can go a long way. And I used to be one of these guys who said I thought it was always cliche and just kind of lame when somebody would say, well, that Notre Dame game's such a big deal because it's early and it can provide momentum. And I used to think, that's not true. And then I saw the 2011 team basically carry one win into like 10-0 or whatever it was. So, I mean, like that was very big for them. And I've seen it happen before. So it certainly can happen again. It's a big one. It's a big one that they probably have to have.
Our guest today has been beat writer Nick Baumgardner from the Detroit Free Press, joining us on our first preview show. We'll have the next couple of weeks 2 more. As always, Nick, we enjoy having you with us to get things rolling and look forward to getting you back as soon as they tee it up and we have some game action to talk about. So, as always, Nick, thanks for your time.
Yeah. All right, Mike, sounds good.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, we open at number 14 in the preseason Amway Coaches Poll. Michigan State checked in just ahead of us at number 11. Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Penn State are all in the top 10. Rookie Mason Cole has been named the starting center for the Arizona Cardinals. The team made the announcement on Monday. Tyrone Wheatley Jr. announced on Thursday he was leaving the program. Over the weekend, Stony Brook announced Tyrone would be transferring there and would be eligible to play immediately. He has 2 years of eligibility left. ESPN announced on Sunday that game day will be in South Bend for the opener with us on Labor Day weekend. On the recruiting scene, we picked up another verbal over the weekend for the class of 2019. Three-star receiver Quintel Kent. He is from Lakewood, Ohio, St. Edwards, and he's a wide receiver. Hoops got another verbal for the class of 2019. 6'7" swingman Cole Bajima from Linden Christian in Washington State committed over the weekend. He seems like the kind of under-the-radar player that Coach B likes. Great shooter, can play multiple positions, and is very athletic. With the season just weeks away, make sure you have our free show apps so you can keep up with the latest news on your Wolverines. It's free in the Google Play and iTunes stores. You can also hear us on Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Wolverine Sports Radio. Next week, we will continue our season previews. My scheduled guest is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. So make sure you tell your Michigan friends and family about the show and join us next week. Until then, I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!